Thank you for joining us tonight. And again, we are continuing our Books and Beyond author series. And my name is Pinky Shah, and I'll be your host tonight along with Sabina. Just as a reminder, this event will be recorded. And if you guys can please keep yourself on mute while I talk to Shelby. And once we are done, if you have a question, unmute yourself, or you can just type a question in a chat or raise your hand, ask a question directly to Shelby, or let us know and we can ask it for you. So we are very excited. And tonight we are joined by Shelby Van Pelt. When Shelby isn't writing, she's juggling cats while wrangling children. Her debut novel, Remarkably Bright Creatures, have spent 6+ months on the New York Times bestseller list and was a selection for today's show, Read with Jenna book club. Born and raised in Pacific Northwest, she now lives in suburbs of Chicago with her family. Thank you, Shelby, so much for joining us. Welcome to our program. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I know, as we were talking about a little bit in the pre-show, I'm in northern Wisconsin right now, which is not where I live, obviously, but I'm here for a book festival, and the leaves are starting to turn here. It's like the first feeling of fall that I've had, and it's just fantastic.
Oh, no, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule. Before we, dive into your book, but just to let you to tell you a little bit of background how I ended up picking your book is everybody we had multiple copies in our library to begin with, because your book was read with Jenna book club, but everybody would return the book. And it's a small town, so we always tell our patrons we have a very good relationship, and people share their thoughts whether they like our book or don't like the book. And every time they return your book, they will say, this is one of the best book I ever read. It was so feel good book. It was such a good book. And they would just leave with the great feeling. And that happened over and over and over. And that's when I reached out to you and just gave it a shot in the dark, not knowing that you would accept, because you're very busy person. But thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And here we are, and everybody gets a chance to talk to you. So while I was reading a book, it is actually very unique to have an octopus narrate the story. Can you please share a little bit about the journey of this book from conception to the reality, and how this whole idea was born?
Oh, sorry, I got something in my eye really quick.
Take your time.
Sorry. Yeah, so it actually came about fairly randomly. I've always been an animal lover, but I didn't really know much about octopuses until I kind of got the idea for this book and got into writing it. I got the idea one afternoon when I fell down like a YouTube rabbit hole about naughty octopuses. Is a fantastic rabbit hole to go down. I mean, it was just so entertaining. There were all of these videos of octopuses in various aquariums and tanks that were kind of like behaving badly, trying to escape, or, just kind of impressing their caretakers with their antics. And at the time, I was not a fiction writer. I had a fairly boring office job that I'd been in for about a decade, and I had stepped back from that. My husband and I had moved to a new city, and I didn't know anyone, and I didn't have a new job yet. So I kind of had this downtime, and I'd always loved writing. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to use this time to try to write fiction, just try it. And I think because I was in that frame of mind of kind of looking for characters in the wild wherever I went, I was doing a lot of trying to eavesdrop on people at the grocery store and the line, and sitting at coffee shops, just trying to soak up people and voices and characters. And so I remember seeing this video of an octopus that was very determined to get out of its tank, and just thinking to myself, that would be a really fun character to write. What would that voice sound like? And, you know, the voice actually came to me like pretty naturally. I don't know if I was a cranky old man in a prior life or something, but like I just started kind of hearing this very snarky, very curmudgeonly, like very superior voice. I didn't know that much about octopuses at the time. I knew that they were very smart. And so I thought, I wonder if this captive octopus would think that he is actually smarter than the humans who have put him in the tank. And so that kind of kicked off the character. Um, Not too long after that, you know, I had kind of filed it away. I didn't really do anything with it. And then I took a writing workshop. It was actually the first writing workshop I had ever taken. And it was a continuing education class, you know, the sort of thing that anyone can sign up for. A lot of libraries have classes like this or workshops where it's just like a community thing. And in that class, we got this writing prompt to write from an unusual point of view. And taking my notebook paper out, because this was like 10 years ago, so we did not have laptops and iPads everywhere. And just writing this little scene of this cranky octopus kind of introducing himself. And the instructor of the workshop really liked it and encouraged me to keep going with it. And, you know, that page of notebook paper basically became the first page of the novel. And I just think it's fascinating. I think it's one of the things that has changed least throughout the whole process was like that one scene of Marcellus introducing himself. It was pretty true to the original form that I wrote in that workshop. So obviously I never would have dreamed it would be anything more than a writing exercise, much less become a novel or a best-selling novel. So you know, I always like to think like you never know what little crumb of inspiration is going to grow into something that you never could have dreamed it would be.
Right. That's quite a journey. So you are saying that this book was in making for 10 years, or that was the time that you kind of put it aside and didn't work on it, or you continuously little by little worked over 10 years?
I would say that like 10 years elapsed between that first time and when I finished it. But I had a lot of periods of time during that 10 years when I would not work on it for like a year or two. You know, I was just, I was when I had my kids and, you know, we were just kind of in a different stage of life doing other things. And I guess I just wasn't, I don't know, I wasn't that motivated or that I didn't think I could do it. I don't know. But from the time that I actually made kind of I had a critique partner, we made a pact to finish our books that we'd had started so many years ago. I think that was more like 9 months, like maybe 9 months, maybe a year, to actually get the draft done and edited and written.
Wow. And since this is your debut novel, so did you reach out to anybody for any advice? And if you did, what was the best advice that you received?
Yeah, so I guess I could approach that question a couple different ways. On the writing front, I had a critique partner that I worked with really, really closely. I had mentioned her that we had this pact, and we were basically in the same boat. You know, she was from that original writing class, was how I met her, and so we had both been like working on our novels on and off for all of these years, and we just decided like, hey, let's actually make a run at finishing this. And so I used a lot of her feedback and advice. I mean, I couldn't have written the novel without her. You know, I had other close critique partners too, but she was really the person that I depended on week after week. We would trade chapters and get on the phone and discuss them. And I don't know if it was, if she came up with this or I came up with it, or if it just sort of came up together, but it's a piece of writing advice that I still lean on very heavily. And it's when I'm writing something, if I'm not enjoying writing it and it is like it's this scene and it's just like pulling teeth and I'm sitting there just hating my writing life while I'm writing it, it probably means that something is wrong with that, like something is wrong with the plot, something is wrong with the scene. We had that, she and I both had that happen so many times. We would, you know, trade chapters and just be like, you know, oh God, like I hated writing this, you know, this just, it's awful. And it's like, you know, the writing may or may not be awful, but if I feel that way as a writer about it, then how are readers going to feel about it? Like, it's just, that was always such a red flag that some little thing needs to be tweaked or changed in order to make this flow again. You know, and then on just like, there's also kind of a science component to this book, right? Because he's got, you know, we've got Marcellus the octopus, And I leaned very heavily on a woman that I had met through a different critique group who was a marine biologist. And I actually asked her to read my book, and she did very graciously. And just help me with the science parts, you know, to make sure that I was really getting Marcellus right. She actually put me in touch with some people she was connected with that do octopus rescue in Alaska. And I had them read some of my scenes and help me you just kind of figure out where the line is. I mean, everything that Marcellus does in the book physically, the way that he interacts with his physical environment, like I wanted all of that to be possible. And, you know, obviously not being a person who has worked with octopuses in captivity, I really
Right.
did have to rely on the generosity of other people to share their knowledge to help me get there.
Wow. Wow. I know. I was just gonna ask you, that was my next question, of what was your research? Because there is a, you don't want to get something wrong in people. Did you get any, like, clearly you said that you had people helping you, so to get the facts right, did you get any buddy reaching out that no, octopus don't do that? Did you get any feedback after the book was published?
Yeah, it's funny. I've had more feedback about it's like the littlest things that people reach out and give you feedback on. It's like um you know, there was, I think I had in the book, there's a character that travels somewhere to a different city. And I think I had it taking like 2.5 hours. And apparently, like, that's not quite possible. Like, it's 3 hours. Like, you know, so it's things like that that people tend to, and I get it. Like, I totally get it, because when I read a book, if it's something that I am really intimately familiar with and it's even a little bit wrong, like, it bugs me too.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, on the octopus front, I've had a couple of people push back on my use of the word tentacle. That is not a technically correct word for an octopus's arm, but I do go back and forth between using arm and tentacle in the book. And I knew that that was a choice. Like I knew that, you know, technically they are arms, they are not tentacles, but I felt like Marcellus would hear people calling them tentacles all the time. Like
Mm,
it's a word that people use, right or
people
wrong.
use, yes.
Um, so I decided to stick with it, just because I like it. It's a great word. I just wanted to use it. Um, yeah, I had the marine biologist folks who read my book corrected me on a number of things. I think I had Marcellus seeing color. I had him like pointing out, like, oh, you know, the person in the red shirt. And it turns out that we scientists don't think that octopuses can see color the same way that we do. They don't really know, but their best guess, based on the evidence they have, is that it's probably more like a dog or a cat. They see a different range of kind of grayscale or different tones. So he wouldn't see probably like red and purple and things that we see. So I had to go through and just scrub all mentions of color from Marcellus's point of view. Things
Oh,
like that, which, you know, I was happy to learn along the way. It's really
yeah,
fun to learn stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's very interesting. So how did you have any other title as an option? Well, how did you come along with this title? Because when you start to read, you feel like Marcellus is a star of the book, and he is a remarkably bright creature. But as you read along the book, it turns out to be other way around. It's Marcel's point of view of humans that he thinks that humans are a remarkably bright creature. So how did
Occasionally.
you? Yeah. um,
Yeah, you know,
so
the
how,
title, I kind of lucked into it. I for most of the time that I was drafting it, I didn't actually have a title. The file was just saved on my computer in this file named Marcellus.
mm,
And it wasn't until I was like getting ready to query my book to agents. So when you query agents, we do what's called cold querying. Like it's just you send them a letter and the first 10 pages of your manuscript, and you hope that they will ask for more. Like the vast majority of the time it goes in the trash. A lot of times you don't hear back, but yeah, you're making this query letter is basically the face of your book and the thing that is going to make them either turn the page and read your sample chapters or just pass on it. So I put a lot of time into my query letter. And it was funny because I was working with a few other writers who were also querying. We had this kind of support group going, and they were like, okay, so your query letter is great, but your title's awful. So my title was just Marcellus. It's like, that's not
okay.
a title. Um, so I went through this whole exercise of trying to find, pick through my book and pick out memorable phrases and names of places and things and people, and trying to put them together in some sort of order that made sense. And I had this exercise that a writing friend had shared with me, where you would take these words from your book and you try to kind of like mash them into title formats. So it's like, you probably have heard, there's titles like the something something of someone someone, which is a very popular one, or where the something does something, where the crawdads sing.
Yeah.
And so I think Remarkably Bright Creatures is in the vein of like Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which is a fantastic book that came out a couple years ago. But it's
Mhm.
one of these phrases that is kind of cliche to its subject matter. And I had noticed that when I was reading all of these articles about octopuses, almost every one of them would have some version of, octopuses are remarkably intelligent.
Mhm.
Octopuses are exceptionally bright creatures. Just some play on like a superlative, a word for smart, and a word for animals. And
Mm.
so I was like, okay, well, I think that's the title of the book. And then when I realized that I could have it have that additional meaning, I was really excited about that. I think it added to my excitement for it.
Yeah, it clearly worked. It's a beautiful title.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
um, Now dive into a little bit more deeper on the subject of animal captivity. Like without zoos and aquariums, most of us would not have witnessed the wild world of animals that coexist. Is it too selfish of us to have the zoos and aquarium, or what are your views about animal captivity?
I mean, I think that's a fantastic question, and one that I don't know that I have an answer for really. I think I feel both of those things. I feel that tension, and I think to the extent that I wanted readers to feel something about aquariums from the book, I wanted them to feel that tension a little bit. um Not necessarily like I'm saying there's, this is right or this is wrong. It's hard. I feel like, certainly there are bad zoos and aquariums out there, and it's the sort of thing where you know it when you see it, right? um where I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and if you guys are book people, you might be familiar with the book The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate. I think it's Catherine, right? Yeah, Catherine Applegate. Christina Applegate is the actress.
I,
um, Catherine Applegate. It's a book, a fictionalized kind of quasi fiction slash nonfiction about a real situation that actually was in my hometown when I was a kid. There was a gorilla named Ivan who was in this like cement um, cell with a glass front in this shopping center in Tacoma, Washington. And I remember going as a kid, and you're walking into this shopping center and they had all sorts of like popcorn and rides inside. It was a great place to go as a kid. But I hated walking by Ivan because, even as a kid, I could tell like, okay, this is bad. Like this is a not good example of an animal in captivity. Um, and then on the flip side of that, you have, very, very important work that zoos and aquariums do with conservation and education. Um, I did a book event in Charleston, South Carolina, uh,
Mhm.
last month, 2 months ago, sometime recently. And I got to visit the South Carolina Aquarium while I was there. And they have this whole section of the aquarium that is devoted to rehabilitation of injured sea turtles. And it's all, but it's all glass, so you can actually see into this like workshop where they are working on these animals to get them ready to go back into the wild. And they have like each one has a name. When I was there, they had cheese names, so it was like there's queso and goat and gorgonzola. And they have a little thing where you can, a touch screen where you can read their whole story about like, oh, this one had, a fishing hook in its throat and they,
Oh,
got it out, and now they're trying to get it back to health. Um, and I look at something like that and I'm like, okay, as much as we can look at Ivan and say that is bad, we can look at this and say this is good. Um, I guess everything else probably lies somewhere in between. It's like a
yeah,
giant gray area.
yeah.
So
Be-
that's kind of
Because
how I.
all your yeah, Marcella's chapter started with day captivity,
Yeah.
the So that actually caught our attention because you named all his portion of the chapter is numbered by how, so it's, you know, his perspective that he does see himself as a captive.
Yeah.
So but another thing, when you were sharing your story about how Octopus's Marcellus voice came in your head, I did audiobook and also I read. I was, to speed up my process, I was doing both. I was reading your listening to or doing audiobook and also reading. But the Marcellus's voice on audiobook is fabulous.
Oh, it's so fantastic.
It's fantastic. Is that what something, is it what you imagined?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's Michael Urie who does it. He's an actor. He has been most recently on the Apple Plus TV show Shrinking, which has Harrison Ford and Jason Segel.
Oh, favorite. Yep, I love that show. Yep.
He's the friend, the like snarky lawyer friend.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he was, I mean, because he's like a real actor. I mean, not that he's a big deal, kind of. The fact that he was willing to take on this project, I was just floored. And then Marin Ireland does the bulk of the narration, that is the third person narration. And she's also like a rock star in the audiobook world. She does all of Frederick Backman's books. She just has like a very, very acclaimed list of authors and credits that she works with. So I've been very, very lucky at many, many points along this journey. And I think having that team of people to do the audiobook is one of those big strokes of luck, because it came out so well. Yeah. Exactly how I would have imagined Marcellus's voice. I don't know that anyone could do it better.
No, it was wonderful to listen to the audiobook. It was really, really good. Okay, so as a writer and a creator of this story, who's the main character according to you of this book? Is it Marcellus? Is it Toa? Is it Cameron? Who
Tova.
Is it?
I think I would have to say it's Tova. Yeah. I think she is, and maybe some of this is probably like my bias as a writer, because I base the character of Tova on my grandmother. And so I think I just feel probably closest to her, and probably most invested in her story for that reason. But I do think she is sort of the, she's the driving force behind everything that's happening. And then, Cameron originally was supposed to be like a villain, because I was having no idea how to write a novel. I'm like Googling how to write a novel and getting, these websites or whatever that have instructions. And it's like, okay, you've got your hero and your villains. So I'm like, okay, so I've got my heroine, I've got Tova, like I need to have a villain. And, I discarded that rule along the way somewhere. The more that I wrote Cameron, I realized I don't think he's a bad guy. He's a guy who needs to work on himself. And, I kind of started like rooting for him. So I just ditched the whole, villain thing and just had him be sort of the, the second protagonist, or he's a little bit of an antagonist, I guess, to some degree. He pushes Tova a little bit. He pushes her buttons a little bit.
So as you said, the Marcellus was the first character that came to you from this book, and then there was Toa, and then everything just kind of fell into the place. Do any other character, do you think, you kind of pulled from your life?
I think so. Yeah, Marcellus came first, Tova came second. And by the time I had gotten to Tova, the thing that I knew that Marcellus and Tova had in common was that they were both stuck. Marcellus is physically stuck in his tank. Tova is like stuck in her, like her rut, her routine, her, her way of thinking about the world. She's just, she's kind of going on a loop. And, the things start to change, and it becomes clear that she's not going to be able to just keep going on that loop indefinitely. And, that scares her. And it's kind of the thing that forces her to start to reevaluate and change. Ethan actually, I think, was probably the third character that came into the book. I sometimes do this in the early stages of a project, and I'm doing it a lot right now in the project I'm working on, where I don't know what to write. So I just think like, well, what would my character be doing today? And, Tova's thing was, well, she's going to the grocery store. Everyone goes to the grocery store. And so then Ethan kind of came about out of that. And most of my critique partners that I was working with at the time write romance and romantic comedy. And I think I got them really excited because they're like, oh, you're going to write a romance. I'm like, no, not really. They can have, yeah, they'll have a friendship. There will be a thread of that running through, but it's not going to be the main part of the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then like I said, Cameron kind of came in because I thought I needed to put a villain in, and the rest of the characters, man. Cameron's Aunt Jean is probably the character that I wish I could have written more of, but I just couldn't because he, kind of leaves her house and goes on his adventure, and she's not physically there, and it's not that interesting to write people on the phone, I've learned. So but yeah, I really liked her, and I wished I could have written more scenes with her because she was a lot of fun. And she is like, Tova's kind of my grandmother. I feel like Aunt Jean is just like a mashup of a lot of women in my extended family, like in a good way.
In a good way. But another character that I thought that we could have seen a little bit more, and it's like a little bit of suspense that you left, is Daphne, because Daphne's life changed after Eric's death. Like, what actually happened to her, and why did you choose not to tell her story?
Well, a couple reasons. So actually, in the version of the manuscript that I sent to my agent originally, like when I was querying, I did have a few chapters that were from her point of view, and they were all very much toward the end of the book, and they were really short, and they were very cryptic. Almost to the point where like you weren't sure, like the character was unnamed, and I had intended that the reader would figure out that it was Daphne, that we were, in her point of view. And my agent strongly felt we needed to cut those chapters, and that hurt because I really liked them. But I think her reasoning was good, and I think she was right. Her reasoning was first and foremost that it just breaks up the flow of the book. You have to bring in a character at the 75% mark when people are already used to the format of like, okay, Marcellus, Tova, Cameron, Ethan. And then you have this other thing that comes in. It just kind of, readers don't like that. And then the thing that she said that really resonated with me, she said she thought it felt kind of cheap. And I think what she meant by that was I had information that I wanted to convey to the reader. And Daphne was the only person alive who would know that information, the information being exactly what happened the night that Eric died. And so instead of having it come to the reader in kind of an organic way, I just handed this random character the microphone. She hasn't been in the book before, but I'm just like, okay, well, here, come tell us what happened. And she's like, it just feels unearned, to have it come about that way. And then her third point, which I thought was also a good point, is that, Daphne is an incredibly complex character. I mean, she struggles with addiction. She just, it didn't do her justice to just have her kind of pop in like that. It really would almost have to be like its own book or its own story. I would have had to really bring her in from the beginning and tell that story. And yeah, so we cut it and found kind of a workaround to get most of the information to the reader, but not all of it. And that was another thing that we went back and forth on. Was, would Tova ever learn what happened that night? And, at the end of the day, she doesn't get a concrete answer. And, we talked so much about that. Actually, my agent, my editor, at this point we had sold the book, and now my editor is involved, and we were trying to figure out, well, just, how do we sort of wrap this up? And I think everyone felt pretty strongly that and I certainly did, it felt real to have Tova not necessarily get the full answer. Like, that's real life. Like, you don't always get, the thing that you're seeking. Tova gets enough. She knows that it was an accident, and that has to be enough for her to move on. Like, almost like she has to kind of meet the story halfway. The story is going to give her some information, but she is going to have to do some work too, and meet it halfway and be able to move on with this like imperfect information.
But okay, So you kind of just said that you're working on a project. So do you have your next book?
No, I mean, I'm working on it. It's not done yet.
You're not gonna make us wait next 10 years, though, are you?
No, no. I'm hoping to get a draft done like, this fall would be kind of my goal. Um, but it turns out it's very hard. I mean, writing a book is always hard. But I think writing a second book is sometimes uniquely hard for authors. And I've heard that from many of the authors that I have had a chance to get to know over the last year and a half on, at book events and such. I mean, authors are always wanting to give advice to other authors, which I think is awesome. And so many people have told me that, like, oh, your second book it's gonna be so hard. I'm like, thanks. Yeah, it kind of is.
But so do you think because you kind of obviously you poured your heart out for your first book, so you feel like, okay, now I'm empty, I need to get more inspired, or it's just dealing with the expectation from the success of the first book? What do you think the second novel, why is it hard?
I think it's hard. Well, so when I wrote Remarkably Bright Creatures, I never seriously thought anyone would read it. Like, I mean, outside of like my husband and my critique partners, like, I knew that some people would read it, but when I was writing, I did not have this thing in the back of my head about, what are people going to think of this? What are reviewers going to think? What is Goodreads going to think? uh, and that is very much in my head now, and that's like it's a block. It's an additional block that you have to get over. And I think the only way to do it is to just try to like separate your brain somehow. I mean, I think editors and agents are always, they want to talk about, where does the book sit on the shelf? What is the genre? Who's the reader? What's the market? And like those are all great things to think about when you're an editor or an agent, or even when you're an author who maybe is in that later stage of editing or querying or trying to sell a book. But it's a terrible thing to be having in your mind when you're trying to draft a book of, you're trying to draft and you're thinking like, well, what does this sit next to on the shelf? Like, I need to learn how to turn that off, I think, in order to be a little bit more effective. And so I'm working on being able to do that, but it's hard.
But would you call yourself a self-taught writer? And once you started writing, then you said you took a writing class, because you kind of dropped a lot of little, tricks that you were using to write a story. That you go out and listen to the people, and then what normal people do, and that's how the Ethan's character came. So you kind of share a little bit. So what do you think it's the uh, do you think you're natural, or sometimes people go to the for the classes that helps, or it's a mash of both?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'm self-taught in the sense that like I don't have an MFA or any kind of degree in creative writing. Like my college degree was in a totally unrelated field. um I think that classes are super helpful. I think they are mostly helpful, at least for me, in connecting you with other writers. Like,
Okay.
And I'm not talking about MFA programs or like, credit degree programs, but just, your sort of run of the mill, like local community college has like a writing workshop class. Um, a lot of them have like great instructors and you'll pick up some great tips there. But, I personally think the biggest value that you get from that is just the community. You get to meet other writers, you have some accountability. It's more fun to write when you're in a community of other people that are writing. So yeah, I am self-taught, but I definitely have not done it alone. I have worked with a lot of other writers that I've met along the way. And, I think there's a sort of a stereotype of writing as a very solitary pursuit. And, when push comes to shove, like, yeah, at some point you have to sit down by yourself at the computer and write. But at least for me, um, none of it happens in a vacuum. Like I'm always writing and then like sending things to my critique partners and getting their feedback and sort of, you know, it's a continuous process for me rather than like, okay, I'm going to sit with blinders on and write an entire manuscript and then send it off. Like I'm constantly having people kind of stir the pot along the way.
Yeah. And would you be able to share even a little bit about your next project? Does it involve any other animal? Or
Well,
you take
so I have two that I kind of bounce back and forth. I'm not totally confident which one is going to stick as like the second book that I'm going to pitch. They both do involve, so one involves an animal, but it's not an animal narrator, and the animal is never actually on the page, but it involves an animal. An animal is part of the
story?
plot. And then the other one does not involve any animals, but it involves creatures. Say that much.
Okay. All right. And I'll just ask you last question before I open it up to people. What are you currently reading? Do you have any favorite books that you read or reading?
Yeah. So I drove up to Wisconsin this morning from Chicago. It's about almost a 5-hour drive. And I was really looking forward to it because I was like, I'm gonna listen to an audiobook. I actually don't listen to audiobooks that often. I have a hard time listening to audiobooks while I am like doing chores. I just get distracted and I find myself having to back up and re-listen. But driving is definitely one of the few things that I can do and really lose myself in it. So I got from my local library had Banyan Moon by Tao Tai, which was a read with Jenna Pick from last summer that I hadn't read yet, and I was so excited that they had it available. And it is just, I mean, I'm probably, I don't know, maybe a quarter of the way through, but it is such a beautiful book. So I'm really enjoying that. The audio version is great too. And then my most recent recommendation that I am shouting from the rooftops for anyone who liked Remarkably Bright Creatures. There is a book called Shark Heart by Emily Habeck, and it's going to sound crazy. It's a couple that gets married, they're newlyweds, and within the first few months of being married, along with struggling with all of the normal like newlywed adjustments, the man finds out that he is slowly morphing into a great white shark, like physically and mentally. And so they're dealing with that. And like it sounds so ridiculous, but it is so beautifully written. It's just a gorgeous book. And so I think that, folks who like Remarkably Bright Creatures for that aspect of like, well, here, this is a little bit ridiculous, but I love it. I think would also like Shark Heart.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the suggestions.
Yeah.
I'll open it up to our patrons here if they have any questions. Guys, if anybody has a question, raise your hand, unmute. Okay, Mrs. Thayer, if you want to unmute yourself. And
okay. I wanted to ask Shelby, how was her book chosen to be a Read with Jenna selection? What's the process of that?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot about that in the course of the last year and a half. I didn't really know much about it. So apparently publishers you have to only pick one big celebrity book club to submit to. I think it's kind of a faux pas to submit to both. So I think pretty early on, I remember my editor talking about like, well, we think Jenna would like this. And like, we're probably going to go for Read with Jenna instead of Reese or Oprah or GMA or any of the other big ones. It's like, it was kind of on the table almost from the beginning, which was a little bit like intimidating. I remember it was summer of 2021. So this is probably about 9 months before the book had come out. It's the middle of July. It's hot as heck in Chicago. And I was at my local Target I had loading cat litter into the back of my car. My phone is in my back pocket and my phone starts buzzing. And I'm like, oh, what is this? And I look and it's my editor calling. And my editor never calls. She always emails, maybe once in a while texts. So I figured like, okay, I should probably take this call. So I pick up and we were in the middle of a round of edits. I think it was like a Wednesday and the edits were due Friday. And I'd had about a month. So I'm a little bit of a procrastinator. Like whatever the deadline is, I will be there, I will meet it, but it will be in your inbox at 4:59 on the day that it's due and probably not a minute before then. So I was probably about half done with my edits and was going to have a busy couple days over the next couple days, but I was going to get it done. So my editor is on the phone and after a couple pleasantries, she starts probing me. She's like, so how are the edits going? How close are you to done? And I just lie through my teeth. I'm like, oh, great shape, almost done. It's going great. And so this is why we don't lie, because if you lie, you're going to get called out on it, sometimes like 10 seconds later. She's like, well, could you just go ahead and send me what you have if you're almost done? And I'm like, oh. And it turns out she wanted to send it to Jenna Bush Hager. Jenna was going on vacation the next day, and she really wanted to get Remarkably Bright into Jenna's hands before she left for vacation. She thought this would be a perfect beach read for Jenna. So I'm like, yeah, well, I'll have it to you by 6 a.m. tomorrow. And she's like, that's fine. No problem. So I go home, make a pot of coffee, tell my husband and kids, like, I'm out for the night. I pulled probably the closest thing to an all-nighter that I had since I was in college, and sent it off at 4:30 in the morning, done and ready to go. For that round of edits anyway. And I was so exhilarating, and it was it felt very momentous. But then we didn't hear anything for 6 months. And so I was just like, oh, well, maybe Jenna read my book. At least someone sent it to her. She probably looked at it at some point. Maybe she didn't finish. I don't know. But we did find out in the following February, so it was published in May. So this is about 3 months in advance, that she had chosen it, which was fantastic. My publisher had called, my publicist rather, had called to tell me the news. And as soon as we were done celebrating, it was just like a litany of warnings. It was like, if this news gets out, they will take it away, because all of the celebrity book clubs thrive on the reveal. They want it to be a big secret until the day that they reveal the title. And so my publicist, I remember she said to me, do not tell anyone, literally no one. I was like, well, what about my husband? She's like, you can tell your husband, but only if you're prepared to divorce him if this leaks. So I'm like, ah. So it was and it's obviously a fantastic thing to be chosen for any of the book clubs. And I think, Jenna's club will always have a special place in my heart. I think she is truly just an exceptional person. She really does read all of the books that come across her desk for this. She loves books. It's kind of one of her missions is to elevate debut authors and voices that wouldn't otherwise maybe get a big splash in the marketplace. So overall, a very good thing, but definitely added a layer of stress to an already stressful season of spring leading up to the release.
Well, congratulations. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sayre.
You're welcome.
Do we have anybody else? Anybody else have a question? Oh, come on.
I have one more. One more.
Please go ahead.
Tell us a little bit about your Swedish background, because I noticed at the end of the book, you bring in that Swedish toy, the horse, the Dana or Dora.
Yeah, the dollar horse.
The dollar horse.
If we were at my house, at my office in my house, I have on my shelf behind me, the dollar horses that were my great grandmother's from Sweden. So like Tova in the book, my grandmother came over with her parents when she was, too little to remember, but, a small child. And they brought all of this stuff with them, linens, embroidered linens, and dollar horses, which they're not only horses, they can sometimes also be I think I've got a chicken. Maybe there's rabbits or something. But they all have that same kind of style of painting. And I think in Sweden, they were used just as toys for kids. I feel like I remember looking into this, not even in connection with this book, but just because I was curious. We had these things all around my house, and I was thinking oh, they must have some sort of, special spiritual meaning or something. And I feel like in true Scandinavian fashion, it's oh no, they're just toys. Very practical. But they are the ones that I have at home that are, probably, how old would they be? Well over 100 years old at this point. Have always been very special to me. And yeah, so I kind of brought some of those aspects of my grandmother's culture and, things that I grew up with, the dishes that she grew up making. Every Christmas, still to this day, she will bring out a plate of pickled herring with hardtack and like margarine, not even butter, but like margarine. I've got a couple of uncles who will love it and will eat it. And me and all of my cousins, and there are a lot of us, there are about a dozen of us that are around, are just like, this is not coming down to the next generation because we will not touch it. I have my lines.
Okay, well, don't tell the people in Wisconsin you had margarine. They won't be happy.
Yeah, some of these might be like a my grandma thing rather than a
Right.
teacher's thing. I think
Yeah.
honestly, probably it was like a Great Depression thing. I think
Sure
she
it was.
came from that
Right.
era and
Right.
used whatever ingredients they could have. And oh my gosh, I still remember I loved angel food cake when I was a kid. And every time we made an angel food cake, we had to also make a pound cake because you couldn't throw away those egg yolks. You had to make something else that would use the yolks. I mean, she was just every drop of bacon fat like saved in a can and used to cook something. And that probably is again like probably more her generation or just how she grew up versus
Right.
a cultural Scandinavian thing. But yeah, I
So
feel like
how did you weave that part into the story towards the end of the book when Cameron found the loose floorboard and there appears that horse?
yeah. Well, so I knew that the horse was missing. And that actually happened pretty early. Like I knew, okay, this was going to be something that she had, and there was going to be one missing, and it was going to somehow matter at the end, but I had no idea how. I originally had written a different ending. I don't think I've ever shared this in an event before. Oh, and this is being recorded, so it might go out to the wider world. You guys are getting new. This is an exclusive. I had originally, before that ending with the floorboard, where he finds the Dala horse that had been repaired under there, I had written a different ending where he was going to try to stop her from selling her house. And so he literally comes into her house with like a baseball bat and is like wrecking the banister because he's like, oh, the buyers will never take possession of this house now. And it didn't work for obvious reasons.
No.
Like it's, that it wasn't a good ending. I will say endings are hard to write, but they're pretty easy to rewrite. Like it's very easy to just take the cap off of something and put a different cap on. So I did that a few times. Trying to figure out and this was like before I had sent it to my agent. I was just working with my critique partners at this point, trying to figure out what the right ending would be. And, I wanted something where it mattered that I wanted it to matter that she was going to sell the house. So like the only way that she would have ever been able to find that floorboard and subsequently find this piece of her son, this thing that he had done for her that she had always wondered about, was to have all the furniture moved out. So I was like, okay, this makes it feel better that she is selling the house and moving on, because if she hadn't gone through that process, she wouldn't have this thing. And a lot of it was just trial and error. And like I had a lot of help from my critique partners, a lot of Zoom calls of just throwing ideas out and trying to see what would stick.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting.
Yeah, you guys got the exclusive alternate ending that
yes.
All right. No, this was fascinating that you shared all your journey of your making of this Remarkably Bright Creature, and I appreciate you spending time with us. This was very. We are very grateful for you to take your time out and spending with us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for spending your evening with me and for organizing. It's always fun, and those great questions. So thank you.
and good luck to you with your future projects, and hopefully those books come out soon and we can have you again over here. So.
Well, thank you so much. I hope so too.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Pinky.